Oh yeah, because everyone loves a wise guy. And where would the two of you be without me? He has a point, Moo. But the brain's all bark and no bite. You could argue the muscle is all bite and no bark, which is why I always keep the two of you together. Yeah, quiet. Get back to setting up the studio. You got it. The brains is a volatile one. As an archetype, it's probably more volatile than the heart is, and that's an archetype that can be reduced all the way down to a character just being a girl. But the sins of the bad brains are far more punishable. It's annoyance. Unlike the heart, the brains is basically guaranteed to be involved with the information and problem solving, which, of a laundry list of problems, have the chance to come off to a consumer as holding their hand or even mocking them. Here's a problem. Obstacle 37 or Bad Guy 14, whatever it happens to be, and they have some bullshit TM. That means defeating or overcoming them isn't possible in the first encounter. In a case like this, it falls on either the muscle, or I guess anyone depending on the circumstances, but a situation like this is asking for the brain. They're hands-off, rational, objective, and have the answers the other party members make up for in talent and being really nice. But the brains will usually say the right thing and let whoever's facing the challenge get the upper hand. But what if they say the right thing too often? It strips away the thrill. We don't always want the answers, we want to see the characters overcome a hurdle despite not knowing the best way to do it. And the last thing we want is for a challenge to be put in front of us and to have that challenge get dismissed because of something arbitrary that only the brains could have known. If Slugzilla, terror of the fantasy kingdom of Anmentai, can only be defeated by having a bunch of salt on it, that's fine. That's an inference we could have made as an audience, and not only does it not solve our problem, it puts an entire other task on the table, and it gives direction for the party. To find some way to mass-produce salt, which might sound mundane, but conflict is only as exciting as you make it. On the other hand, what if the dark wizard Lord Usinikvi can only be defeated by a gilded boar tusk being stabbed into their foot? There are only two ways to go about getting the party that information. The first is exploration and exposition, finding people who can guide them towards the answer, events and experience that give them insight into the things that work for them and things that don't, things and setting to lead them towards that final conclusion that lets them return to face the villain and best them. Or the brains can figure it out for themselves or remember something they read in a book. The brains finding out sensitive information like that is more than fine, but if the revelation isn't timed properly, it raises questions. And not the kind that makes people want to delve deeper into your world building, distracting ones. A good set of brains should handle smoothing over the process, not task switching. There's a reason they're not in charge, because they can't do the heavy lifting. They're not an active role, and if their role is mishandled, they can become a detriment to their party, or a hassle for your consumer to engage with. This is a little something about writing brains. So, where to start? The brains as a role are mostly dependent on their relationship with the rest of the party. They're a problem solver like the muscle, but are usually tasked with support, since any intellectual problems they face will either be completely negated by the brains getting involved, or will remain unsolved even with the brains' involvement and lead to a whole side story about the mystery of just why they couldn't figure it out. The brains is best as a resource, one to use their gifts and talents to provide guidance to help whoever's in charge get their hands back on the reins. The brains is also a good character to help the characters with authority get their hands on the reins in the first place. Do we have to talk about Morgana? We definitely should. The metaverse is incredibly complicated. And while Persona's combat isn't the most complex as a toolbox, Persona 5 gives the player a lot of bells and whistles and little mechanics they have to be wary of when progressing through a palace. But Morgana is an asset because he's our person on the inside, the encyclopedia to any new information or mechanics, and until we get our bearings, he's kind of our mentor too. Nah, he's much more of a guide than a mentor. There are things he doesn't know, and plenty of things he does, and he does a good job of translating relevant information to Joker and the other thieves, while still contributing moment to moment and being an asset to the team. And having someone who can reasonably explain all the little things that are put in because the video game has to be a video game and this 104 dungeon into the depths of the collective consciousness isn't going to dunk on itself is a nice bonus. But if that's all he did, he wouldn't set a good example. Morgana is an effective brain for the group not because of the things he does, but because he's fallible, because he's a character and an asset, but not a know-it-all. He doesn't have all the answers, and that leads to drama. That leads to concessions. It leads to him not needing to keep the Phantom Thieves on training wheels and stick to advising Joker directly and continuing to be an asset to the unit. Morgana acts like a high and mighty jerk sometimes, but he comes around and contributes to their problems in ways that only he can for the betterment of the whole party, and the furthering of his own strengths. Let's talk about the Handler. I'm not going to let you use a section on one of our lectures just to take shots at her. I'm not taking shots at her. Okay, well, I will. Neither Morgana or the Handler know everything, but where the sleep paralysis cat has open-mindedness and constructive contribution, the Handler has whimsy and exposition. Where Morgana either has confidence or confusion, the Handler gets herself into mortal peril on, every other quest, and spouts obvious information and instructions for us to follow at every turn. You know, how dare she pull the we's and us's out for absolutely anything? I would call Handler a know-it-all. Her word is sadly gospel and guides the game forward, but it's hardly ever anything that an objective stat couldn't handle, and worse, it's usually stuff that gets explained to you in cutscene just beforehand. The handler is a widget, and is functionally more of a bother and detriment than the gathering hub maidens. At least they don't constantly fail to learn a lesson about running out ahead of the hunter in dangerous places. At some point, she just needs to stay in base camp. The things the brain says and does are of the utmost importance, because the brain has innate value to the party like the muscle does, and it's a lot easier for a character's words to fall flat and grate on someone than a character's actions. And the handler is supposed to be the brains, but most of her actions in Monster Hunter World only serve to make us feel like she's a dunce, and so her function as a constant guiding tutorial makes her insights feel less valuable, and gives her a nasty stigma with her own community for being useless. You hear Handler talk a lot, since she's the one who has to carry you, the silent protagonist in conversation. She has to constantly remind the hunter where to go next, so even if they go on tangents for whatever reason, they're always reminded exactly what the next step is. And when the seeds of annoyance get watered like, again, constantly having her throw herself into peril, they grow out and wrap consumers up in them. Well, part of that is that her ineptitude makes the hunter feel more capable by comparison. But that's not good enough. The brains is an enabler, they're a problem solver, but usually more in a sense of guiding someone else to solve a problem for them. Their strength is insight and direction, and Deep Rock Galactic wouldn't function without mission control. Okay, I got this. Gunner's the leader, Driller's the muscle, Engineer's the heart, and Scout's the lancer. Which sounds like it leaves the brains out, except mission control is also a part of the team. They're the one in the logistics, the guy in the chair, the one who keeps track of the happenings of the mission and updates the field team on what, when, and how to go about them. But it works because they do so with a goal. It's protocol, business. They have to go over company standards whenever an objective pops up, not only as a reminder and insurance for the veterans, but for the greenbeards in need of some guidance. Mission control is about as artificial as you can get. He doesn't particularly care about the other dwarves, but they share a common goal, and his job is to make sure that their job goes as smoothly as possible so they all get paid. He has personality and doesn't just serve the function of telling us what to do. He's just all about the bag. Quotas need to be met, missions need taking, and while he can't stop the others from spending hours at a time dancing at the bar or filling the launch bay with barrels, he can quip and comment his disapproval plenty, and it being rare for him to give compliments isn't a case of him being unlikable, it's just who he is. We're co-workers, and that relationship is never a detriment to us. We're content to be co-workers, and while we might go down to Hox's to screw around and have a blast, he only wants the job done and done right. My favorite is when you get a promotion and he reads off a script congratulating you after asking you to pay for your own promotion from the company. It's great. Deep Rock Galactic is a corporate nightmare. It's the responsibility of the man in the chair to keep the show on the road, disclose important information, and guide everyone onward. Mission Control is competent, and always in the know. He has the position, and rightfully so. His instructions are clear and with a purpose, and his commentary is pretty charming too. You kind of put a character like him in a position of omnipresence, where he's always watching, always listening, and in his case, always contributing to the task at hand. But Omni-anything goes to people's heads. And Schaefer is everything Mission Control isn't. He has a goal but no methods, power but no plans. He has a lot to say but no presence to contribute. He is the man in the chair, and unlike in Deep Rock, he has the remote, that means the brains is in charge, and we're just rats in a maze. But the brains should be one of the rats. Even Mission Control is in on the struggle. He's a cog in the machine, not the one turning the wheel. What we have in Deep Rock is communication, a back and forth, requests and demands on both sides towards a common goal, while Schaefer is the only one with the goals, the only one making demands of us, and he never once tells us what for. We never have a say, and instead of offering insight and perspective, he uses the position of being the man in the chair to put himself up on a pedestal despite his complete incompetence. And the brain doesn't have to be smart in a traditional way, but if they can't contribute to the team's effort, and they can't help solve lateral problems, then they shouldn't talk nearly as much as the brains usually should. The talent can be traditional, but I'd like to bring special mention to rogues, the street smarts, the more cunning, prickly, underhanded kind of brains. The, you keep your head low and stick to me and everything's gonna be just fine sort of brains. Social skills go just as far as logical ones, and having someone who knows the setting like the back of their hand is just as good, if not better, than having someone who knows every element off of the periodic table in a really scientific setting. But smart depends on context. And without context, where someone is constantly giving out information without relevance, they become the inverse, which is the know-it-all, the yapper, the annoying one who just won't put a sock in it. And sometimes they say something helpful, but by that point it's a boy who cried wolf. I don't care if you've seen this before and know the solution, and I don't care if the other characters understand, agree, and follow your plan without a second thought, but after a certain point, all the character can do is yap. All the things that come from their mouth become filler and go right out the other ear. Capturing the smartness does not mean letting the insufferability run wild, unless it's a character flaw that gets corrected later. The words of the brain carry almost as much weight as, if not more than, those of the heart and hero, to both the rest of the party and to the consumer. We're supposed to trust them at the end of the day, and more than anyone else in the party, they're supposed to be reliable. More than everyone except maybe the muscle. The hero's shortcomings lead to drama, and a failure on his part ripples throughout the plot, impacting everything around him. A Lancer's failure tends to bore into his own mind, or specifically the minds of the other party members. The failure of the heart could lead to a falling out, or terrible shifts in character dynamics, while the failure of the muscle tends to just be more work for the rest of the group. When the brain fails, it's not only to the detriment of the party, but it has the potential to be a detriment to the viewer. The hero's success progresses the plot. The Lancers asserts the strengths of the rest of the group. The Hearts brings the team closer together and makes them all stronger, while the muscle makes room and keeps the train trucking along. But the same is true for the brain, and the cost is much steeper. Because the muscle doesn't have to interact with the audience, but the brains always does. And it's that closeness to the audience that helps bridge us to the conflict. And it's because of all that and more that the brains needs the most care when writing.